Okay, so current numbers are 68.1 million cases with 1.5 million deaths. In the United States, there are 15 million cases with 285,351 deaths. And in the state of Wisconsin, there are currently 448,009 cases with 69 deaths. Today is December 10th of 2020. To start off, what is your name? And do you mind sharing demographic information for the study, such as race, ethnicity, gender, age?
Sure. So my name is Colleen Marchwick, and age is 51, gender identity is female, and I guess race is white, Caucasian. Was there another one?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
And then where do you live and what is it like there?
So I live in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and it's a lovely community in western Wisconsin. Population I would estimate is about 66,000. And I work at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, which is a regional comprehensive institution that's been in existence since 1916. And we have about 10,000 students, primarily undergraduate.
Great. So when you first learned about COVID-19, what were your initial thoughts about it, and how have your thoughts changed since then?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I feel like we in international education were really on the forefront of COVID-19, because I first was involved with it when we had a large group of international students coming for the first time from China in spring 2020. So they arrived at the end of January, and some of our students were affected when President Trump initiated the first COVID-related travel restriction, the ban of entry from China. So some of them had to change their ticket, our continuing students, I should say, so that they could come back in spring. So it was a bit of a stressful time for those students who were continuing and who had gone home for the holidays. And then there was this notice that, on this day at this time, if somebody had been in China, they weren't allowed entry. So.
What do you remember some of their reactions to that at all?
I'm always impressed with our international students about how flexible they are. So of course, they just did what they had to do and made it back in time. It came at some, cost to them and their family, right? To change a ticket last minute is not inexpensive, but, I think they valued the continuation of their education, so they just made it happen. But I think it was quite stressful for those who had to do it. Yeah.
Okay, and what issues have most concerned you about the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, so what I would say is within international education, obviously we had the first intake of, this was new students who were starting under a dual degree program from China that entered the US in January. So their circumstances was a little bit different than those that were continuing students. So they had never been to the United States before, and they came, I think, under great scrutiny, right? Because they arrived right as the story exploded in the United States. And I think they were looked upon with some suspicion about being possible vehicles for transmitting the illness to members of the community. So obviously, initially, when they arrived, I think the US was still kind of grappling with our understanding. And I think there were like comparisons like, oh, it's like the flu, and healthy people don't need to worry. And then I think there was, so I think that's a big change, right? Like the understanding of what the illness is as it spread around the world. And when it first started, the general consensus was that it wasn't transmittable when people were asymptomatic. And I think we know that is not correct. So I think when students first came, obviously there was kind of some concern about it, but like the guidance we got from public health wasn't that we had to quarantine the students or do anything of that nature, which I think made some families that of the US students uncomfortable. And I would say that overall, I think things were okay, but I know like housing and dean of students in that January, February time frame did get calls from primarily domestic constituencies about the decision making of allowing the students into the residence halls and not quarantining them. But at that time, we were following public health guidance. So we were kind of on, I would say, pins and needles until that 14-day period passed and we didn't have a positive COVID infection, right? So.
Yeah, and how would you say that personally affected your job?
For me, I just was, meeting regularly with people. I mean, it adds stress, right? I don't want to deny that it didn't add stress because, just it's difficult for like a student who might come here without their family, and you are kind of take the place of the caregiver in some ways. And so just like I wouldn't want an Eau Claire student who had limited, family support to find themselves in this, whether they're domestic or international. I just, these new students who just arrived and don't really yet understand, US culture, or still working on their language skills. It's a very kind of stressful time, just minus COVID, making that transition from your family and friends in China in this case, or Malaysia, and then building your life in the US, and to have that added scrutiny placed on top of you, like, oh, you could be bringing COVID to our community, or oh, I might get quarantined, or I might get sick. So I think the students, anytime they had a cough during that like kind of initial period, they were just super anxious, like not only for themselves, like that they might be sick, but are they bringing something into the community? So it was just a very stressful time.
I think everybody had that fear. Every single time somebody coughed around them, they kind of looked at them like they're crazy.
And I think there were cultural differences because at that time, right, the US public health guidance, when they came in like January 22, February 22, is like, oh, we don't need to worry about masks. Well, all the students who are coming from Asia, like that's a tradition that predates COVID, right? People wear masks all the time for all kinds of reasons, whether it be, pollution issues or, communicable disease issues. So then I think some students kind of wanted to wear a mask, but they felt like, that called attention to them, right? What if they wore a mask? So, yeah.
Okay. So let's see here. So we can kind of go personally here. How has the outbreak affected how you associate and communicate with friends and family?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I'm like living in the Zoom world, video conferencing world, like everybody is. So that's kind of been a challenge. I will say my mom has she's in her like late 70s, and she has upper respiratory problems. So we've been very cautious around her so as not to. So I haven't seen her for quite some time, since this summer, really, because I stopped seeing her in person once we couldn't, it became harder to be outside.
And how do you think the outbreak affected the community as a whole?
Well, I mean, I'm going to just speak to the university community a little bit, just because I think, I think it's affected us in a lot of different ways. I mean, I also work with the study abroad students, so I would say that, in March, when it started really kind of expanding into the European forefront, and then, we had issues in Korea, so we had students in Korea we brought home, and then we started bringing students from Europe home, and then it went to other parts. So ultimately all the spring 2020 students came, excuse me, back from abroad, which was a very stressful time. And I think when I look at that, I think there you really see like the difference in community. Like for me, like that was the first time that I saw like the difference in how people perceive the illness, because, you know, obviously parents who had a student abroad at that time were concerned, but but they were concerned for different reasons. So some people were like, I want my student to come home and I want you to cancel the program and get them home right away. And then we had other people who were like, please don't cancel the program, you know, don't overreact. We want our students to be able to finish out their experience, you know. So for me, like that was really like the first experience of what I think became like this divergent view of the illness that, I mean, it's prominent here in the US, you know, and I think it is in other parts of the world too, maybe in a less prominent way, but.
Okay, and how do you think was your most effective way to deal with the difference in opinions?
That's a really good question. And I'm not really sure, you know, that I know the right answer or that I successfully navigated the question with families. I mean, I guess I was just forthright with people, saying like, I understand your perspective. You know, we're also receiving calls from families that have opposing views on this, and so we're trying to make the best decision. I think we did have a travel risk policy, like a lot of universities. So typically what happens is when countries hit like a certain level of advisory, whether it's through CDC or US State Department, those are typically triggers for bringing students back. So once we hit those markers, we brought the students back. You know, so I mean, I think part of what I did in communicating with students and parents was just to say, like, here is the kind of criteria that we use, and we're continuing to follow that. You know, once we would hit that level of advisory, you know, we would discuss as a committee and then make recommendations to the provost about, you know, bringing the students home. So, and then, you know, that resulted, you know, that kind of resulted in the cancellation of summer and fall, winter and spring. So, like that academic travel has been suspended, and my hope is that maybe in summer 2021 there could be some resumption at a smaller scale. But I think that's still undetermined, right? We're still watching closely because right now we're the problem in the world. Nobody wants us.
Okay, so then how are offices and people around you responding to the pandemic?
Yeah, so like as you can see, I'm here in my university office. So I have actually worked in my university office since the pandemic because our staff went all remote except me. So I felt like, well, I can come to the office because I'm not a risk to anybody. So I just think, like, for me, working at the university, I think everybody is trying to thread the needle of providing high quality services to the students, as well as to respect the risk tolerance of staff, whether it's because they have, you know, underlying health conditions or family members with underlying health conditions. And I think here at the university, we're very fortunate that because of the types of jobs we do, that we're able to do our work remotely. And I think for me, where I think it's a much more challenging dynamic is when you have like individuals, for whatever reason, their work isn't conducive to remote work. You know, a lot of service work is that way. So I know it's caused a lot of hardship. I think, you know, when we look overseas, you know, to some of our university partners overseas, they're all at a similar stage of what we're encountering. Like our partners in China, they're back to in-person instruction. Um, Whereas like they had like their spring 2020, they were remote, right? And I think other university partners are kind of, I think, working remotely like we are. I'm not sure if that answered your question or
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
not.
So in dealing with a lot of people, especially with those from different countries and with families and such from the United States, have you seen any of those people change their opinions from day-to-day activities?
I think what I've seen, especially with the international students, if I kind of go back to that spring semester, I think what happened is a lot of people were really concerned about things that were occurring in the US. So then, we saw a departure of a lot of international students from the US at that time. So just to give you perspective, we had, I think, around 300 international students on campus physically present in spring 2020. This fall, I think we have like 125. And, some of them our students are able to take courses from their home country, but overall enrollment is like 200, so about 30% enrollment reduction in international students just from spring 2020 to fall 2020. Um, And I think, for me, what I think international partners have seen is just some of the revelations about, American capacity to manage something of this nature. I think you have, and it's not really painting the US in a very flattering light. So I think some people are worried, like, will the US continue to be one of the top destinations for international students in the future? Seeing the world has kind of seen the many flaws in our health system, and you see much smaller countries with much less resources who've done a lot better job in managing. So they talk about places like Vietnam, which I think most people would view as like having significantly less resources than the US, has had like very few deaths and has done a relatively good job in managing it. Or look at Taiwan, or China, or New Zealand, other places that have not had the level of death that we have here. I think this morning, I can't remember, it was like close to 290,000 Americans have died since the beginning of the pandemic. You know, I just don't think that necessarily shows the US in its best light.
Right, yeah, me neither. Does the does the government in any way have any kind of, I guess, agency over um, what you do? Are you like, I'm talking about like local government, like city or state government.
Yeah, so for I'm just going to frame it in the international student side of things. So most of those immigration rules come at the federal level. So all of the rules. So for example, a federal rule that has affected international students is that typically an international student who's studying in the U.S. institution is required to attend coursework physically.
Hmm.
And that's the reason they get to be in the US, right? So if they were taking 100% online courses, they could do that from their home country. So, there have been a loosening on the requirements for online participation in courses by international students, um, which is a positive thing, and it started in March. Um, and it's continuing now. We just got notice yesterday from uh, student exchange visitor program, which is like a part of Department of Homeland Security, that special exception will continue, but no new students can come in. So if they are continuing students, they can have this exception, but no new students can come in to take primarily online program of study in the US.
Okay. So then with that aspect in mind, do you think they responded well, government leaders, to that?
Well, that's probably a bigger issue. I mean, there's been a lot of, I think, and I don't think I'm saying anything overtly political here, but I think there has been a lot of immigration changes under the Trump administration that have sought to limit even non-immigrants, because I think that's something that sometimes people forget about international students, is that they are considered a non-immigrant visa holder. They come here with the intent to pursue their studies and then return to their home country. And they have to, when they receive their visa, they have to show ties to their home country to get the non-immigrant visa. So even non-immigrant visa holders have been subjected to some of the immigration restrictions with the Muslim ban. That was one of the first things that happened. And there's some other changes related to what they call duration of status. Even some of like what I talked about, in fall, there was this moment where they weren't sure they were going to let students continue online, and there was a lot of back and forth, and some institutions, filed legal action because it was quite a, what I would say, like unrealistic expectation. So at the time they were looking to say that students had to be at either institution that was in person or hybrid, and that if for whatever reason during the course of fall 2020 an institution would go 100% online, students would have to either go back to their home country or find a new institution which to transfer to. But who's going to take a transfer student in the middle of a fall 2020 pandemic, right? So I mean, fortunately that action was withdrawn and it didn't move forward in that format. But it caused a lot of stress for the students, right? And I think this is another thing that is difficult for the international student, is some of the immigration rules related to COVID have not been just consistent, and so they're always a little bit on edge about like what that's going to be. And and like I said, right now our students who left, the travel ban from China still continues, so those students who left can't come back. And many U.S. consulates and embassies are closed abroad, so students who needed a visa renewal can't get an appointment to be able to return to the U.S. even if their country isn't under like a travel ban. So just a lot of barriers to mobility, which is difficult for students who are just wanting to finish their degree program. And just a lot of jerry-rigging a system to make sure that they can have some continued progress in their degree.
Okay. Do you think that as soon as the travel bans get lifted, are you going to be bringing students back right away, or you think there's going to be a wait?
I think it'll depend, right? Because right now, I mean, there's multiple factors, right? Like now there's these like logistical barriers and immigration barriers, but there's also, I think parents are scared to send their kids to the United States right now based on, risk of infection and the risk of, I guess the hospital capacity is the other risk. So if a student would find themselves falling ill and not be in that category of people who can do home care, or even if they were a student who would have some other type of healthcare issue, just an accident, right? Like what is the capacity to serve them when all the hospitals are full with COVID patients? So I think it's just unnerving for parents to look at what's going on in the US.
Has anybody you know personally gotten sick?
What I would say is, yeah, I've known of some people who have been ill, both here at the university, and then I've had family members. I haven't had anybody, well, I shouldn't say that. I have one high school friend who was hospitalized, and my cousin's son was hospitalized, but I have not, it's not people that I have like real close everyday contact with.
Okay. Has your experience through all of the whole pandemic transformed how you think about your family, friends, and community? And in what ways do you think?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think it's really interesting because I feel like in some ways this is like a weird social experiment. I remember going to a conference once and somebody basically said to me, why do we need international mobility anymore? Why do people need to study abroad? Because, basically we can just all do video conferencing. We don't need to travel anymore. And I think for me, the one thing that I appreciate from the pandemic, if I can say I appreciate something, is that I think it has reinforced the importance of that person-to-person connection, right? Like I think we've all come to realize that as much as technology has helped us in so many ways and allows us to have this conversation, allows courses to continue safely, it does not replace like that in-person experience. And I think that's both from like a learning perspective, experiential learning perspective. It's also from like a social emotional perspective. Like we want that in-person experience with other people.
Okay. So I guess knowing what you know now, what do you think that individuals, communities, or even the government need to keep in mind for the future?
I do think, I think it has revealed in the United States, I will just say, like, I think that we have a very weak public health system. Because much of the care that we get is through this private network that is, in some ways, employer-based, right? So if you have employer-based healthcare, you access this private network of hospitals, but those private network of hospitals don't really, from what I can see, don't really work together as a system of public health. And I kind of feel like there's been, I often think about the Eau Claire County and City Public Health. If you go to their website, it looks like a staff of like 3 people or 4 people, and the expectations that have been placed upon them during this pandemic, I mean, are quite extraordinary. And, I have great sympathy for them because I can't imagine how difficult the work is that they're doing, given that, public health just isn't typically a priority in the United States. I don't know if that changes. I think it also has revealed, the kind of inequities in healthcare access. When I think wealthy people, whether it's the president or the basketball players, NBA players, they have access to the best treatment in the world. But, many of the people who I think are dying are people who don't have access to healthcare or, put off going to the hospital maybe when they should, or, they have less resources, so they live in tighter quarters, right? More people in one house, so then it spreads more quickly among family members. So I think that's another kind of sheet that's been pulled off America for the world to see, really. And that doesn't leave us in the greatest light.
So do you have any last thoughts or anything like that you feel would be important for people looking at this in the future for them to know? Any lasting thoughts?
I just hope that we learn from it, right? I hope we I'm sure as a historian, like that's one of the things that I would suspect draws you to history, right? Like that, the possibility that we can learn from what has occurred in the past you know, for me, if we are 50 years in the future and then we're doing the exact same thing and we're have the exact same thing happen to us, like for me, that would just be heartbreaking that we didn't learn anything from this. Because I think a lot of people paid a price, and so I hope that our policymakers, don't let all those deaths go in vain or are wasted, right? Like that we take that loss that is experiencing, and we learn something from it, and we like apply it to the work we do in the US to prevent such a thing from happening in the future.
Yeah, I think 22 could be an entire semester for a course.
I know. It's
So
so
much
funny.
has happened.
I feel like we've lived like 10 years in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, it's weird. I don't know, like with memory and stuff, they talk of like the passage of time has just become so strange for me right now, because even stuff that happened a year ago, I can't really remember if that was a year ago, because it seems like that's too recent. Like so much has happened in this 1 year. Um, so
All right. Well, if you don't have anything else, 'cause I don't have any more questions for you. I don't think I can't really conjure anything up.
yeah,
You
yeah.
pretty much covered it all.
Well, that's good. I really am. I think this is a great project, and I wish you and Dr. Venus Fry a lot of success with the project, because I think it's really important to
Mhm.
capture these thoughts now, and then I'm sure many, hopefully, historians will learn from it in the future, policymakers in the future. So I'm happy to be able to be a part of it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of the Chippewa Valley COVID-19 Project and the University of Eau Claire, we thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And it was a real pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day.
You
And
too.
stay safe. Bye.
Bye.